Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our speaker, Mr. Lawrance.
Good morning, Mr. Jamil.
Yes, good morning. And then, of course, to the all attendee, welcome to the Competitiveness Talk number 48. And our talk basically going to be focused on specifically on export commercial service percentage and of course export commercial service. And the title is mouthful, of course. I'm also curious to know about it. Let me bring you back to what this talk is all about. Mainly, I think since in early 2000, Malaysian government have become very serious about the result of ranking, and we got three ranking agency that we actually follow very closely, and MPC was appointed as the agency to monitor. And we have the Ease of Doing Business by World Bank, and then we have the GCR report, which is under Global Competitiveness report by WEF, is in Geneva. And then we have also WCY, the World Yearbook, the World Competitiveness Yearbook through IMD. And the one that we're going to focus today is basically on IMD report, which actually cover about 255 criteria and 4 main criteria, which is actually business efficiency, the government efficiency, infrastructure, and one more we refer to infrastructure, government efficiency, business efficiency, and of course what is it I missed just now? Yeah, Lawrence will talk about it later. I just missed one more. Okay, anyway, this indicator, this criteria that we look into is not just about ranking. The government decided this is not just about ranking itself. We need to know the weaknesses that we have as compared to other nations. So basically, because of this, this year, our results are not really good. We dropped ranking from 22 to 27, and that's something quite an alarm. So MPC have decided to undertake this program called Competitiveness Strategy, and what they did is that they appointed some associate to undertake the criteria that is not performing. And one of those criteria that is not performing is the one that are actually going to be covered by Mr. Lawrence today. So because of that, we would like to see and to understand about the criteria, how that this criteria actually impact Malaysia and what they are looking for, and then how can we raise this ranking. Not so much about ranking again, how can we improve this ranking on this issue. So with me today, honored to have Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence is a very experienced guy who have been everywhere, I would say. So let me just read his biodata, his career summary for you, so that you know who you are listening from. So let me share, Mr. Lawrence. His name is Lawrance Kong, okay, and he's a certified Six Sigma Master Black Belt in the same world with me. And then quality and productivity trainer from Next MU Pte Limited. He mentions clearly that you got to pronounce MU. When the moment I heard the MU, I said, wow, I don't need another one more MU. One MU is enough, and I'm an Arsenal guy, so that's why I don't like MU. So the moment I heard MU there, I said, what are you referring to? luckily, Lawrence was putting his Motorola University, where I also graduated from my Six Sigma from Motorola University. So we are in the same boat again. He founded this Next MU in 2011. He's by profession is an electrical and electronic engineer. I mean, he worked with Motorola many years, so he got experience, like, you know, working in electronic industry with Motorola more than 15 years actually. And then he joined the training wing of Motorola, which is a university of Motorola, and then becoming the one of the main trainer there. And let me see again. He have worked in many areas actually, starting from you know, in norm of engineers, and then grow up until become the what do you call it? Involved in many areas. What I can say is that he involved many areas: logistic, design, and things. I cannot read this; it's too many. So I'm just going to summarize. Like, he is a well-equipped guy with so much knowledge in the operations of businesses. And since from Motorola University, of course, to be a Motorola University trainer, and you definitely need to have a well-equipped knowledge in Six Sigma and so on. So with that, I think he was entrusted by MPC to undertake this study. And then today he going to be sharing his finding on the subject matter. And let's hear and let's welcome him for this talk. And we appreciate his effort, and we hope that we can learn something from here. So with that, Lawrence, I hope I do justice to your information about your CV and so on. So I'm passing to you to continue and probably adding up anything that you would like to add up to your CV. Okay. Lawrence, here you are.
Thank you, Encik Kabir. Thank you for the nice introduction. Yes, of course, you have put in many good words for me. Thank you for that. And certainly, it's a consolation to know that we are both from the same system, you know, in terms of our training from before. So, you know, it's good when I present this, you know I'm presenting to someone who understands what I'm thinking about. So, good morning, people. Thank you for the introduction to this presentation, Encik Kabir. Thank you again to MPC for giving me a chance to do this research and study. For me, this is a chance to learn something new. Before this, definitely this was not something that I knew about. Certainly, I learned a lot from this desktop research, as well as the discussion with various people from MPC and the consultants. Like what Encik Kabir said, my title here today is about the exports of commercial services. Export of commercial services, this has a few criteria. I'm only taking two of them because they are very similar. One is 1.2.12, the other one is 1.2.13. 1.2.12 is about the absolute value of the commercial services exports in US dollars, in billion US dollars. You can see it was at rank 31, but it dropped in 2020. And the other criteria, this is similar, the export services, but it is measured against the GDP in US dollars as well. So this is a ratio between the export services versus the GDP dollars. So we're looking at the proportion, whether the export value takes up a certain amount of GDP percentage. So again, this performance is deteriorated. You're going to see the trend afterward I'm going to present. Both these criteria are in the international trade. You can see this is within the economic performance factor. Yeah, there are 4 factors Kabir was trying to illustrate. I think this slide, you can see clearly the 4 factors that MPC is trying to engage consultants to look into various areas that need improvement. So export services is not something that we talk about every day. You probably don't hear discussions on this topic, not only on a day-to-day basis, but even in the trade discussion. You'll be surprised in a global trade discussion, often commercial services exports is often unnoticed. But it is understandable because the nature of commercial services, not talking about export, but the nature of the commercial services is less tangible. Unlike goods, unlike products, it's something that you can hold, something that you can touch. But services is like a transaction. You can't really touch it, but it happens anyway. So because of the tangibility, we seldom pay attention to it. But you'll be surprised the issues that surround the services, especially the commercial services, is often more complex than the goods and products transaction. So the focus today in the commercial services exports is nonetheless an important one. Why? Well, not only because countries use this as a policy tool, but it is boosting our economic growth in the country. So if you do not have commercial services and the commercial services exports, which countries all around the world, including Malaysia, is trying to capitalize on gaining revenue. So when we look into export and import, we would like to have more exports because that's where the revenue comes in. So with that, it will bridge the gap of especially developing countries like Malaysia to advance into a more capable, more productive country. So the empirical evidence, for example, from World Bank, from IMF, International Monetary Fund, there are enough evidence about correlation between the commercial services exports to the productivity of the country. So if you have higher level of exports in this area, the productivity growth, associated with this factor is also going to be growing. So this gives you some idea about the nature of this kind of transactional services, even though it's not tangible, but it's sophisticated. But yes,
yes, just need for you before you proceed. Maybe you can clarify, because I looked on the meanings of the commercial service export. They are coming out like commercial service export are total service export minus export of a government services, not included elsewhere. This one I don't understand it. Minus was a government. What does the measurement tell you there?
Oh, okay. Thank you for the question. You clear my speech because we're going to show what make up the commercial services. In fact, the services alone includes commercial and government. So we do have government services like those government transactions or government provisions of services to the public areas. Those are also included in the services. So government also look into this area. But the thing is, for this criteria, we do not consider the government part. So we are only looking at the commercial services, where we're looking at the private sector, where this is about money making, generating revenue for the country. So thanks for the question. But when I show the slide afterwards on the breakdown of all the sectors in services, it's going to be clearer. So you can see how government services fit into the whole framework as defined by, say, the World Trade Organization, for example, or even the IMF, for example. They have a framework that defines what make up services per se. So yes, thank you for that. Our focus here is only on commercial. So let me share with you another slide. The contribution for global services. This is not only about Malaysia. This is taken from the WTO in 2019. The global services industry, the number I want you to take note is 2/3. The global services industry generated more than 2/3 of the global economic output. So you can see it's more than half. More than half of the output generated from the goods transaction. And these services attracted more than 2/3 again of FDIs. FDIs are important for a country to gain not only exposure, but development opportunities, revenues. So this is one of the criteria that at the country level that we look at to see if we perform well. And global services actually contributes to that, because without services, without opportunities for that area to advance, you can't attract the foreign investors to come in. Again, for the sole purpose of services creation to address market failure, we look into the jobs creation. And again, global services provided more than 2/3 of jobs in developing countries. And Malaysia is one of the developing countries. So you can probably imagine in the least developing countries or even in the developed countries, this could be more in terms of the proportion. Let's look at Malaysia, right, coming down to the ground. We monitor this GDP every year, as you know. So in a GDP contribution, one big chunk of it is the GOS, the gross operating surplus. Gross operating surplus is again the proportion of the income that Malaysia generated from the production by enterprises. Again, this is like a difference between the revenue and expenditure to see how well we generate revenue. So the higher the better. So we want to see what contributes to the GOS in Malaysia. So looking into 2019, you can see the first diagram on top. This is taken from Department of Statistics Malaysia. The GOS contributes to more than 60% of the GDP. So if you look at GOS, the second diagram, services contributes more than half the GOS in the GDP. So you can see it's 53.2% of the 60.4% of the GDP. So the services contribution in the GDP, you can say, is a significant one. And not only in 2019, this contribution of services is more than half in the GOS, has been that way since 2014. So for 5 years in a row, services has become a major contributor in the economic growth in Malaysia. So we can't ignore the significance of these commercial services, but you may want to ask what or when a commercial service export happen. I'm just going to quote this. I know the export in commercial services is going to be more complex than this, but just to illustrate how easy it is to export commercial services. According to this Trade Ready blog, it says if you have shared your computer screen with someone outside your country, via Skype or even Zoom or any platform, for example, to solve a problem together or to discuss an issue or to teach or to share, you have exported services. As easy as that. So you can see probably this best exporting in commercial services every day is probably one of the factors that is explaining why we are probably not capturing enough, because a lot of these transactions are not captured for companies who either not registered or for individuals who provide these services. So this is happening every day as we speak, even more than we would anticipate. Let me break it down for you. What is defined by the commercial services in the commercial services, there are sectors, and within the sectors, there are subsectors. So again, within the subsectors, there could be subsectors, right? So the levels of the abstraction in this kind of commercial services definition can go down to 3 or 4 or 5 levels, depending on the definition that is being adopted. Right? So I'm going to show you the framework that's used by WTO. Why I keep talking about WTO is because IMD is extracting data from WTO. And WTO is also following a framework that defines these commercial services. So this is what you are seeing on the page. What the commercial services comprise of. Actually, there are 12 core sectors. There are 12 core sectors. But the government goods and services, not included elsewhere, is not included over here. So for the purpose of this discussion, we're only talking about 11 core services sectors. The 11 core service sectors are here on the screen. Yeah, so you can see there are many sectors of services. For example, transport services, travel services, construction services, manufacturing services. You can read the rest. Yeah? We're going to talk about these different services later on. Within these 11 core services sectors.
Lawrence,
Yes,
you see this the definition, just to be clarified on this issue.
Yes.
When we talk about the absolute value of the export of commercial services, take an example of logistic as an example. Part of our logistic is actually the internal logistic, and of course we have external, freight provider, outside there. When we did take the absolute value of the figures, does that include the services in transaction within the internal in the country itself? I mean, because the word itself, export of the commercial services, I mean, it's kind of misleading. But the figures that they include on the internal land within the country transaction.
The quick answer is yes. The cost of the logistic services, I believe this is part under travel. One of the subsectors in the travel sector. Sorry, in transport. I beg your pardon, in transport sector. So later on, you're going to see we will define the different modes of supply. So if the transaction in the logistic cost or services happens between, let's say, a resident and a non-resident, that one is included as well. So if that transaction happens in a host country like Malaysia, even though we do not go out of this country, but the transaction happens between the resident and the non-resident. So that is defined as an export as well.
I see.
So yes, that's captured. So when we define model, thank you for the question. Yes, we will have 4 slides talking about the modes of supply. I think after that it should be clearer. You are right. The exporting of the commercial services does include many different scenarios. According to the framework that I'm going to share afterwards, the scenario is such that there are specific situation when the transaction cost is captured, and there are out of scope situation where the transaction fees or costs are not captured, and this is spelled out quite clearly according to the framework. All right. So within the 11, thank you. Within the 11 core services, there are more than 160 subsectors. Again, because of the time in this presentation, we are not going to go through all the 160 subsectors. Don't worry. We will probably touch on a few just to give some idea about what make up the core services sectors. This is just to compare for people who have knowledge about commercial services definition. This framework that I'm going to introduce is called balance of payment framework. is gone through several revision changes. So for those who are familiar with the definition, you probably know about the services are being classified under modern and traditional services. So this diagram gives you an idea about which sector in the commercial services are parked under modern or traditional. So for the latest framework, you can see it's parked like this. Okay. So this page gives you a more detailed description of the services sectors. Yeah, so you can see transportation, for example, the subsectors include sea, air, land, or internal waterway, space, pipeline, etc. Yeah, so this also includes not only the carriages of passengers, but transportation of goods as well. Right? Transportations of items, physical items, not just passengers. Yeah. Travel, the subsectors include business travel, personal travel. So the definition here also includes, say, for example, the travel under business purpose to acquire goods. So you can see later on, the mode of supply is combined somewhat. And sometimes the services sectors also combine in a way that when you're trying to look into a certain transaction, because each transaction it involves more than one mode of supply and it involves more than one services sectors. But according to the framework, how that cost is captured is very specific. Yeah? So when you say, for example, trying to capture the cost of an incoming tourist who come to Malaysia for a visit under business purpose, for example. Now, the booking fees and the services rendered to this non-resident coming to Malaysia under the business travel is part under travel services. But when this person in Malaysia, let's say go around and spend, on other products, other goods, and say, for example, receiving services from a lawyer, for example, or buying insurance from residents over here, those costs may not be part under travel. But again, sometimes, for certain providers who do not register with the authority, this part of the cost is not captured, right? So even though some of the costs are segregated into different areas, sometimes they are combined. Say, for example, travel agent, who may bundle the travel service package together with some goods to the business traveler. This we probably cannot see how it's been broken down. But again, by definition, travel includes, tourists or personal leisure travel, or even students. International students who come to Malaysia to study for more than a year, versus the business traveler who come here, let's say for a month or less than a month. They also categorize what kind of travelers they are. But in Malaysia, for example, one of the popular services that we have over here is what we call the health travel. Health travel. We attract many international patients who come to Malaysia to seek medical advice or seek medical attention. This kind of services are kind of travel services that we can gain revenue from. Going on to the construction, this includes different kinds of construction services. So again, if there's any services rendered to a non-residents, or if we have physical presence in another country where we set up different branches and we offer this construction service to the local foreigners over there, this is classified as a construction service export. Personal, culture, recreation. This includes audiovisual services, includes cinematography, music, like performance, live performance. When you invite artists from external industry outside, or there's import. Now, if we provide this kind of performance to foreigners, to a group of foreigners, or we go out to perform, this is export. Communication, that covers telecommunication, and this also includes postal and courier services. Insurance, not only travel insurance, but life insurance as well. Freight insurance, not only on people, but also on goods. Financial services, this is probably a big sector, because under this financial sector, there are many subsectors. Say, for example, you have got bank services, you've got legal services, that covers the lines of credits, letters of credits, leasing, foreign exchange, transaction and securities, asset management. These are lumped under financial services. Computer information, this includes the maintenance services, the use of software applications, installation of software applications, for example, business software. These are lumped under the computer information services. The next one is intellectual proprietary services. So this includes copyrights that you have to pay to use a certain product or services. Either the production of the original or the distribution of the original copyright to another party to either use or to produce and distribute. Right? All these fees are lumped under the royalties and licensing fees. Other businesses or other business services, those that are not considered anywhere else, this will be lumped under here. Now, in the latest definition of commercial services, the financial and business services, sometimes you can see is a bit different. So compared to how it was defined before. So nonetheless, there's no sector that's been excluded. So whatever that was defined in the past revision, it was included over here. So this probably will give you a better understanding on the full services classification that WTO is using to capture statistics to report on the various sector performance. So you can see the commercial services, it doesn't include the government goods and services. NIE, like what Kabir pointed out just now, you see this acronym, it means not included elsewhere. So anything that's not included elsewhere is included over here. Okay. One thing to note about the manufacturing services or physical inputs owned by others, this refers to the manufacturing facilities that are using inputs they are providing by other industries or other providers. They do not produce their own inputs. Right? So this is pertaining to that. Malaysia has commitment to WTO, just like the goods transaction. I presented the tariff criteria before using the WTO framework on GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. In the services trade area, Malaysia's commitment to WTO is similar, because the equivalent on the GATT agreement is GATS, General Agreement on Trade and Services. General Agreement on Trade and Services is derived somewhat from the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. You can say the GATS inspired the GATS. Yeah, so many of the requirements that is spelled out in the GATS requirement has been transferred and translated in a GATS requirement. So Malaysia, like you know how we have been behaving really well, have to you know, always trying to go for free trade in the long run. We have commitment to liberalize many sectors. So currently, according to MITI, there are 10 services sectors or subsectors, you can see on the screen over here, that we have already committed on the schedule to liberalize. What it means is that to reduce the restrictions on service transaction, either imports or exports, right, with other member countries of Just to give you one example, right? There are many examples that we can't cover over here. Let's take, for example, business services. Right? Under business services, especially in the Mode 3 supply, you're going to see what I mean by that, because there are 4 different modes of supply. Under this business services, the foreign legal services, again, we are talking about commitment by Malaysia. So you can probably appreciate this is somewhat the policy generated by our ministry to make sure the foreign services, when it comes to Malaysia, this is a form of import. Just to give you some idea about what this commitment is, because the relationship for the import and export in trade and services is reciprocal, right? So the MFN treatment that we talk about in the tariff treatment, most favored nation, also applies in trade and services. So we can also see how we have been treated in the international scene by how we treat others. Right? So you can see this is one of the requirements for foreign legal services suppliers in Malaysia when they're trying to practice in Malaysia. They can only be allowed to practice their legal services in offshore corporation established in the Federal Territory of Labuan, Malaysia. So this is a restriction, right, in the eyes of the free trade in WTO. But again, this is the commitment that is done by Malaysia. This is still one of the restrictions, but there are many other restrictions that have been lifted along the years. Yeah, say for example, you can see the list of the bilateral free trade agreement commitments that Malaysia has. The latest is RCEP, or I think people call it RCEP. It's recently signed on 15th of November 2020, and this RCEP negotiations, or what you call the free trade agreement negotiations, it happened a few times this year. Because of COVID-19, they held it online, and finally it was signed last month. So you can probably gauge every time they have such agreement, Malaysia would have given concession on those restrictions, right, with the trades. Similarly, in goods and services. Yeah? So in the agreement in tariff goods, we have tariff schedule. Right? In trades and services, we have similar schedules also. Right? So this is another example. You can see in construction and engineering related services, Malaysia also has commitment under GATS in terms of market access. Right? So market access refers to how easy it is for the foreign suppliers to access our market over here. Right? So if the restriction is high, the foreign suppliers will find it difficult to exercise their services or to supply their services. Vice versa, this relationship is reciprocal. If our WTO member country also impose such kind of restriction, Malaysia service providers who tries to have a presence in that member country will find it difficult to access the market. Yeah, so the commitment to liberalize the services sectors is an ongoing one. It's an ongoing one since many years ago when the GATS was conceived. Yeah, so right now, under the GATS commitment, at least 8 entries per sector, at least. The commitment for each market access and national treatment for the 4 modes of supplies are given. Now, you see the market access and national treatment, these are 2 of the so-called trade barriers in services. Right? So let me tell you a bit about those trade barrier in services, because trade barrier in services can be more complex compared to the tariff barrier. Because tariff barrier, well, you have the tariff rates per product. Each product you've got a tariff rate, right? Either you're talking about the average rate or the maximum rate, but there's one rate at least we can fall back to. But for services trade barriers, there are many. We can classify those many into 3 family trade barriers. One of it is called the market access. Right? So the full term is restricted market access. So this refers to the quantitative restrictions. The quantitative restrictions that the foreign entry will have into our domestic markets. So if you impose restrictive market access to foreign service suppliers, you are not making their life easy, right, to supply their services here. Vice versa, if another country were to do the same, services exporters in Malaysia will find it difficult to export. National treatment refers to the discrimination between residents and non-residents. Right? So if we were to differentiate the resident status of the providers, again, vice versa for another country who's trying to import services from Malaysia, discrimination will hinder. The discrimination will hinder this transaction. Another trade barrier is called domestic regulation. Domestic regulation doesn't point to a clear discrimination, but it's more indirect.
Mr. Lawrence, sorry
yes.
to check with you. Your slide is still at the slides on definitions of the Korean trade agreement or things like that. Are we moving the slides already?
I'm going to adjust now.
No,
not yet.
Okay, all right.
Probably the connection quality is a bit poor. Oh, okay. I have not. Let me try this. Now you can see I'm advanced.
Okay, smooth. All right.
So I'm trying to explain the trade barriers before I advance.
Okay.
So one more trade barrier. Thank you, Kabir, for checking that. Yeah, I think sometimes if I'm unaware of this, the viewers may not know that it's stuck somewhere. The other trade barrier is called, thank you, domestic regulation. Domestic regulations are the indirect, non-discriminatory regulation. They are not explicitly targeting the foreign firms, but the impact on trade nonetheless. For example, if we were to impose restrictions on quality, restriction on technical requirement on the services, this is just like the non-tariff measure in the goods export. So if we were to have that kind of policy, which we have, and there are quite a lot of them, in fact, for the various service sectors, of course, opportunities for liberalization later on. So these are the three main family trade barriers in trade of services: restricted market access, national treatment, and the domestic regulations. So all these family trade barriers exist in all four modes of supply. What are the four modes of supply? Let me walk you through that. The first mode of supply is called cross-border. Cross-border mode of supply refers to service that is rendered between countries, right, via perhaps telecommunication means. For example, if we were to say provide a consultancy report via Zoom or via telephone or even via postal services to another country, we have exported services. Okay? So sometimes we have medical reports, legal reports, architecture drawings, engineering assessment, production audits. If this happens between, let's say, Malaysia provider, right, to an external countries, or to another country who need to supply this to another country. You can see country A and B. So we export services in this case. So cross-border services can happen even when the service provider and the exporter is physically in Malaysia still. Okay? So as long as this transaction happens between residents to a non-residents via electronic means or telecommunication means or postal or courier or freight means, this is service export. The mode 2 supply is called consumption abroad. This is easy to understand as well. We talked about it a little bit just now. When a tourist comes to Malaysia, a student comes to Malaysia, or our clients, patients who come to Malaysia to consume services. I would say, for example, international student will come here and stay, for a couple of years just to go through our local higher education, then we are providing educational services, right, to a foreigner. So the consumption of the services by the foreigners will translate to the gain in the economic growth. So therefore, it's a service export. So this means someone has come to Malaysia and they have temporarily mobilized themselves, right? So there's a temporal mobility of the natural person to Malaysia. This is called a service export. Mode 3 is called commercial presence. Commercial presence, again, is something that you hear all along when a local established enterprise will set up a subsidiary or a branch office in a foreign country like bank, right? So you do see, let's say, for example, Maybank. It's a local enterprise in Malaysia. You do see Maybank's presence, let's say, in Singapore. So the provision of this bank services in Singapore by the Maybank provider is called a service export. Right? So this also extends to hotels, companies, education institutions, schools, construction companies, architect firms, legal advisors. As long as we have local enterprises, mainly those are established enterprises, right? When they are trying to expand their business overseas, we will have service exports. So that's why I said service exports happen every day, even without us knowing, without us talking about it. It happens every day nonetheless. Mode 4, the supply is called the movement of natural persons. So movement of natural persons, it refers to, say, for example, when a provider would to physically move to another country. Let's say, for example, in Kabir, yeah, you probably fly to a foreign country to provide a foreign presentation, provide a talk, giving a consultancy service. This is a service export. Yeah. So not only to consultants, health workers, for example, let's say, for example, during this COVID-19 period, we have medical staffs who go overseas, for example, to provide support to foreigners. This is the temporary movement of natural Malaysians to foreigners to provide services. Okay? So this extends to many other industries, legal firms and architecture. One thing to note is that when I talk about natural persons, it means the physical person, like in Kabir, would to fly to, let's say, Istanbul, for example. Yeah, but this also extends to a juridical person. So even if you have a juridical person, by definition, even if Kabir doesn't travel, but Kabir would to authorize someone else to travel on behalf of himself to provide a service that is supposedly provided by Kabir, the service export happens too. So even though there's no physical movement of the natural person, but there's a physical mobility of the juridical person. So this one also counts. Also counts by the definition, it's called a service export as well. Okay, so these are the 4 modes of supply: cross-border, consumption abroad, commercial presence, the movement of natural persons. So when we go through the presentation, you can have this in mind. You know, whenever you have this mode of supply, service export may happen. And normally, the service export will happen with more than one mode of supply. Say, for example, we may have someone who fly here to study, but to consume services over here, to buy insurance. So you can see the service export happen across ports of supply, across services sectors and subsectors. Right? So the reporting on the commercial service dollars, it can be very specific according to the definition. Right? So unless it's not captured when it's been lumped together, then otherwise there could be more than one what you call service export value according to the sectors.
Yeah, I'm a bit curious, Lawrence, because I mean, let's say I'm a travels agent or something like that, and normally when the total transaction for the year, I would not going to separate between, you know, those services that I provided for the foreigners, or those provided for the overseas trip, whatever. I will lump everything into one account. And I'm just wondering how actually the WCY picked up the numbers there. Are they actually picking up direct, I mean, a total number that as long as I'm a travel agent, that means I will consider to be under the export services?
Good question. In fact, this is defined under the balance of payment framework. They've got many clauses to explain how this should be captured. Without going into the detail, yes, you are right. Let's consider the travel agent who do not report, specifically the breakdown of the services provided. It's very hard for us to capture. But by rights, you know, when they list out the services given to a non-resident, because that's the scope we're interested in, they should itemize. They should itemize what those services are related to, because some services are inclusive of physical items. Again, sometimes it's unclear because you cannot sell something without providing services, right? And then sometimes the services is bundled together with physical items. Let's say, for example, the travelers when they buy a travel package, they get a jacket, for example. They get a bag, they get a luggage. Yeah, like you said, it's lumped under the travel services. You know, when the transaction is captured between you know, residents and non-resident residents, because it's a foreigner who is paying the travel agent, we probably cannot capture everything. You know, if it's not itemized like that. What you point out is true, because this is one of the factors that is making the capturing of the statistics difficult. And yeah, like you said, if service providers, if they don't register, or if they don't report, or if they are not vigilant enough to itemize the things, difficult. I agree.
All right, thank you.
Okay, moving on. This is referring to 1.2.15 when we are looking at the commercial services export divided by the GDP. So I just want to take a little moment to define what GDP is, even though this is a very common knowledge people have. Just to define it. 1.2.13 is looking at the proportion of commercial services in billion US dollars divided by the Malaysia GDP. The GDP that we're using is called nominal GDP. This is not seasonally adjusted because, you know, when we look at the prices in calculating the GDP, the foreign exchange, we need to have something as a basis to fix the price so we can compare the indicators fairly across the board. So the nominal GDP is used to calculate this criteria. This is in alignment with many other bodies who are reporting the statistics, like for example the UNCAT, ITC, Eurostat, IMF. Bank Negara Malaysia has commitment to report GDP to IMF per se. Right? So the definition is consistent as to how this needs to be calculated and reported. So we are not going into details about how this is done, but we're just riding on the GDP. GDP is a criteria in WCY assessment anyway, right? So we're just riding on that indicator to look into this indicator. Just to give a little bit more information about how the GDP is calculated according to the Department of Statistics Malaysia. There are three methods BOSM is using. According to the microeconomic understanding, all three approaches should come to the same number, ideally. Yeah, ideally. So this is reported in BOSM. Again, we're not going into detail. This is to show you what are the components being considered in calculating the GDP. So you can see on this slide, services, right? Exports. They are one of the components in calculating the GDP. So it's natural for us to look at how much the services export contribute to GDP itself, because GDP calculation has the services export. Yeah. So which is more so-called reliable? According to the World Bank, OECD, the more reliable estimates has to come from the production approach. The production approach is the first approach on the left. Yeah, so this is known as the gross value added approach. And our Bank Negara Malaysia reports that. Yeah, so there's no surprise here, nothing to be alarmed. It's still as per how we are reporting the GDP. This is to show you which of this is being extracted to calculate the 1.2 for 13. But nonetheless, international bodies who report this may adjust the value because there may be discrepancies. So they may adjust, compare across the board when they compare economies. But again, we're not going to those here. Let's look at the current performance, which is 2019. Yeah, so 2020 WCY is reporting on 2019 data. So I'm trying to show you where we are at before we look into how much gap and how we have been doing along the years. So you can see this is 1.2 in absolute dollars, the billion US dollars exports services of Malaysia, according to the USN. In the last 5 years, we have been trying to increase, which we did. There's a dip between 2014 and 2015. From my understanding, it could be attributed to change in the framework used by IMF and WTO when it was revised from version 5 to version 6. Yeah, so many sectors and subsectors definitions are changed. So across the board, I think there's a lag in adoption period for different countries. So you can see as you speak today, for example, Japan, they are still using in some sectors reporting the last version of balance of payment. But that's immaterial. We're trying to illustrate that it takes some time for different economies to catch up to build in the new definition according to the latest framework. So you can see many of the economic performance, the dip happened right during those periods. But you can see after that, since 2009 or even since 2003, our services export performance has been climbing. Right? It's been performing well because it doesn't really dip much. Yeah? So you can see 40.8 billion US dollars in a year, according to the statistics service exports contributes. So if you look at the other criteria, if we are increasing in our services exports, why the proportion of the services export according to GDP drops? Yeah, so you can see since 2009 or even 2007, our service export divided by GDP percentage has dropped. But we know the service export increases, but if the proportion decreases, if you look at the GDP trend, it's increasing. So if the service export increases and the GDP increases, but the proportion decreases, I think we can only suspect the rates of the growth between these two indicators are different. The rate of the growth for one of it is faster. GDP is faster. Right? So even though we are improving along the years in services export, but we need to improve probably at a much higher rate compared to GDP growth. So this gives some idea about how or where we should stand. Let's talk about the data, information, and sources, where these data are extracted. Okay? This slide gives an overview on how the data was captured all the way to the reporting by IMD. So if you look to the left, we need different sources, right, to provide the different data. You can appreciate this because we have got different services sectors. Yeah, so each sector or representative or associations or ministries taking care of those sectors will have to capture the data. So you can see, apart from the ministries, federal departments, custodians of the sectors, like for example, you have got the engineering society, architecture society, those custodians of the sectors, principal agencies, state officers, federal agencies. Interesting, we have satellite accounts for some service sectors. Say, for example, one of the big service sectors is travel. Yeah? This is one of the major contributor in our services exports. Travel has, or tourism within the travel sector, tourism has its own satellite accounts, capturing the services or relating to tourism. This is something major. Even Sarawak itself has a tourism satellite account, not only in Semenanjung, Malaysia, but we also have just set up this year to look into the tourism related services contribution to our economy. Yeah? So all this data will be captured by DOSM, and the ministry who is responsible for services export is MITI. You can see under MITI is another trade who is responsible for the trades for incoming and outgoing service, import export, promotion, aid, collaboration, marketing. These are the missions of the trade. They also work with DOSM to capture data from the various sectors. So you can see DOSM actually works with many parties just to capture the balance of payment information. Why balance of payment? You see later on, this is where we extract the service exports numbers. So the balance of payment, this is reported by Bank Negara Malaysia. Again, the balance of payment framework, you can see the coverage actually is quite big. It's not only services export, because for the balance of payment coverage, you have let me try and give you some idea about that. Okay, I may have messed up my. Give a minute. I'm trying to show you a snapshot on the balance of payment. Here it is. The balance of payment is like what do you call the financial balance sheet, if you like, right? For Malaysia, it has 3 accounts, right? So these 3 accounts record all the international transaction over a period of time. Normally, within a quarter, we will publish this information. It tracks not only the services transaction, but goods investment, asset investment, portfolio investment in and out of Malaysia. Right? So the 3 accounts are current account, capital account, financial account. The current account tracks things like the material and merchandise, goods, services, exports and imports. It also tracks the income by our residents, properties and shares, as well as the expenditure. Okay? Whereas capital account tracks the transfers of the capital in and out of Malaysia. Right? So this includes the non-produced, non-financial assets like land, natural resources. Financial accounts tracks the investment, bonds, currencies, investments. Naturally, we don't have services export over here. So therefore, to get the services export data, we rely on current account and capital account, not so much on financial account. Okay? So we need these 2 accounts. So how do we extract the services export numbers? Well, we're looking into these two accounts. There's debit and credit, right? Just our balance sheet, there's debit and credit. So later I'm going to show you, if you look into the credit column, this refers to export. So naturally, the debit column will be the import. This is an example of the balance of payment, the current account. So you can see the itemized services and goods are listed over here, right? So it tells you whether we have a surplus or deficits, right? So naturally, we want to have a surplus, right? So when it's deficits, then Bank Negara Malaysia will have the responsibility to make sure that this is going to be improved. And IMF has a vested interest to not only Malaysia but many developing countries to make sure we're in surplus. Yeah? So debit and credit, we should have more exports, right? We should have more income, we should have more activity over here. So you can see the services are broken down to different sub-factors and sub-factors in some cases. This is another page. Okay, this is another page. So this refers to the capital account and the financial account. Okay. So this is how the services data, especially the export data, is extracted. Then DOSM and Bank Negara Malaysia collaborate to report on the services export data. Right? So they not only rely on hard data, sometimes they do have to rely on survey data, right, to know our positions. Say, for example, for balance of payment data, when we want to report services exports that covers in and out of the transactions, for mods 1, 2, and 4, we do have to rely on this. But sometimes for mod number 3, we do have to rely on another statistical platform, which is called the Foreign Affiliate Services, Foreign Affiliate Statistics. In short, it's
sorry, Lawrence, your slide is kind of enlarged a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We'll not be able to see the whole. Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Because I use the zoom. I use the zoom function to zoom in.
Okay.
Thank you. So the collaboration between USM and BNN, they will have to rely on different sources to provide this balance of payment data with WTO. Right? So again, because of the commitment to both WTO and IMF, IMD can extract data from these platforms to prepare the two indicators that you saw just now. Right? So this is how the flow of the data from sources to how it's reported in the WCY 2020. Okay, this gives some idea. Let's talk about the key regulators who in Malaysia are responsible, right, for governing the policies of the services export. There are two. One is Bank Negara Malaysia because of the GDP, the balance of payment statistics, as well as the services export. MITI, because MITI is the body that handles the free trade agreement and negotiation on the different kinds of agreements in other economy. So we do have to hold them responsible for liberalizing the different services sectors, so to boost the performance over here. Under MITI, there is a number of organizations, authority, councils, confederations who are responsible in looking into the different services sectors. Some of these are responsible for a handful of service sectors, like architects, engineering, legal. So there are different professional service custodians, right? They are taking care of. That's why working with MITI closely, they will have to take care of their respective service sectors to make sure that they perform, right? Or they can help the different service sectors to have disputes, to have marketing, promotion, events. So therefore, they are listed over here. But the two main regulators, BNN and MITI. Now, not only these two, I have listed the responsibilities and the missions of these regulators. We shouldn't have to go through them because this information are easily available from the respective websites. Yeah, so I'm just going to scroll through them. In MITI, you can find this on the MITI website. These are the missions of MITI. Yeah, so you can see especially one of it is to increase Malaysia's exporting of services by strengthening bilateral, regional, multilateral trade relations and cooperation. Right, so the recent RCEP is a good example of how Malaysia continues to involve MITI to make sure we have good relationship to allow trade in the international scene. The trade, this is a body to help exporters and importers to make sure they have got enough aid, enough financial aid, enough resources, enough knowledge, enough network information to grow. So all this to make sure that the brand awareness made in Malaysia is going to be stronger. So we are very much focused on goods, but you can see services, we do need to pay attention to service providers. So if they can't grow in Malaysia, they can't expand to overseas. So these are the different regulators. Now, apart from this, I'm going to show you the respective services sectors. There are various regulators for different service sectors. For example, you can see the professional services, right? The regulators, there are few. Say, for example, you look at the legal services. Of course, Malaysian bar, because this is not talking about bar, this is the Badan Peguam Malaysia, right? When legal person need to practice, they have to enter a bar. The various institute of management, they are responsible for legal services, for example. Accounting, bookkeeping, auditing, of course, HGD, they are responsible. We have to make sure the Accountants Act, right, good financial bookkeeping services are followed. So there are a lot of acts governing the services in this area. Architecture, so you can see boards of architects, Ministry of Works, boards of surveyors. All these are responsible for governing the architecture services, how they should be carried out here, especially between residents and non-residents, or residents to residents, or vice versa, or any other modes. Yeah? So I don't plan to read out all of this, just to give you some idea about the complexity of the regulation by different bodies, because there are so many service sectors. This is just not one page, another page. Another big sector is telecommunication. So you can see MCMC naturally is our governing body, governing the telecommunication services. The telecommunication services here, like I said, I may not have included everything, but this is just looking at the telecommunication. But the telecommunication services, by definition, that's the sector, include freight, postal services, right? Then we do need to have other regulators to come in. This is just purely on telecommunication. When we talk about telephony services, internet services, not including computer services, information services, right? So say, for example, if let's say Kabir were to provide a service via telecommunication service, he may charge a fee, right? So that fee may not be part under telecommunication services. This telecommunication services only looks at how much is being charged for using the telecommunication services, like for example, internet. For example, only internet. Let's say, for example, it involves downloading. Let's say Kabir to provide some kind of soft copy for people to download, right? The downloading, that part of the services, that is charged under the provider, right? So there are actually some subsectors within this sector that we are not capturing. So you can see this is purely on telecommunication. Same thing happens to the rest, right? Education, distribution, construction, and healthcare, banking, even banking, the subsectors, the Islamic banking services, and the Takaful Act, the Sharia law, all these will apply. Okay. Transport, logistics services, there are a lot of regulators, right? Because this is a heavily regulated sector. You can see because we have land, sea, air, different modes of transport. Maritime, railway, even the land has road and railway. Yeah? We transport people, we transport goods. Many regulations over here are heavily regulated. So therefore, we can see it gives you some idea about how much restriction we have in transport services if there are so many regulators. Right? So if you think about when there's a kind of work that needs to go through different hands, each hand that touches the work will have some impose of restriction. So if there's a list of regulators like this, you can just imagine how many restrictions are being imposed to this area. Yeah, so again, it's the responsibility of MITI to work with these different parties to liberalize as far as we can to go towards free trade. So without further ado, let's go into the key drivers. Right, the key drivers of why the services sectors are not growing as fast as we would like. Even though it's growing, we can't say that it's not growing. It's improving over the years. So we're just trying to see why is it not increasing enough across the year. So because of that, we will have to look into the trend performance of the services export. Because if we are not looking at the trend, why we perform in such a way throughout the years, we can't understand the gap, why we are not closing them timely. These are the questions, or some of the questions that I had when I looked into the analysis of the key drivers. So I'm showing you 6 of them. Which service sectors are the best performer across the 10 years? Right? For example, if you compare travel, construction, finance, who is the best performer and who is the worst performer in the last 10 years? Also pay attention to the last 2019 data. Are service sectors exports growing or contracting in the last 10 years? So as a whole, we know we are growing. But we know the 11 sectors, are they doing the same? Or some are growing, some are not, some are contracting. And so we want to know who are not performing.
That will be my next question for you, actually. I was looking at the sector that are performing well.
Yeah. I think what's coming will be to quench your thirst. Who are not growing? You'll be surprised though. You'll be surprised some are not growing for I probably am a bit harsh. But when I say not growing means they may be growing but not so significant.
Yes.
Over the last 10 years, they are not really growing that much. And thirdly, who are Malaysia's services import trade partners? That means who do we import from in services? You might ask, how come we are looking at imports? We should be looking at the four. Who are the service export trade partners? Well, the reason is this. We want to know for a few reasons. Of course, we want to know why we're buying from certain countries. Can't we provide our own? Whether the supply and demand is not balanced, we need more supply, or we don't have the competency in that area in the services sectors. Therefore, we need imports. Yeah, so we can do a contrast between the same sector, import and export. Do we buy the same from this country where we provide service to? Okay, do we buy the same? If not, do we start to change, to buy lesser or more across the years from this country? Because that will give some indication about a competency of our exporters in services in that service sectors. Then we can think about opportunities to beef up the sectors. Because this is all about the competitive advantage. If we can export much, our competitive advantage for this sector is high. But we know the competitive advantage changes through time. we may be very good at exporting, let's say, medical services. People come to Malaysia to get medical services from our hospitals, not only because it's cheap, but we are competent as well. But we know that competency will change because services are provided by people, and people mobility happens, and people sometimes retire, sometimes they change, sometimes, through time you have a change of service providers, even within the same enterprise. So by looking into import and export, we can have some idea about our comparative advantage. So in a way, this report also looks into another criteria on services import and the balance of the services trade. So again, it's interesting to see how we compare the import and export trade partners. Number 5, what is the balance of trade in services performance? This look into the difference between the export and import and services. If you have more export and import than import, you have got a surplus in the balance of trade. You have got more import than export services, then you have got a deficit in balance of trade, which is not good. Yeah? So we want to see how Malaysia performs. Do we export more across the years in services, or do we export less, or the same? Right. So we want to have a balance. But you can see in some service sectors, this is not balanced. In fact, number 5 is quite disappointing after I look at it, because it's not surplus at all. You'll see afterwards. Right? What is the level of services trade barriers in Malaysia? This is how we're going to dissect how Malaysia fare across the service sectors, across different economies, which service sectors perform well and which sectors don't perform well, and what kind of services.
We need to expedite a little bit.
Thank you. Okay, no problem. Thank you for that warning. Number 1, who is the best and worst performer? This gives you the breakdown. The best performer is travel, followed by business services in 2019, followed by transport. If you're familiar with Pareto chart, you normally will pay attention to the critical few. But here, this is not our focus. Our focus is on the trivial many. Yeah, so this is like a flip in how we interpret Pareto chart, because we want to know who don't perform well. So we have to look from the right side. Like for example, intellectual property, insurance, maintenance, personal culture, finance services, construction. These are not performing well. So you can see these are opportunities for us to zoom into why we're not performing.
Interesting, because going back, because the construction have been a major sector that been monitored, and then it created many agencies under the construction industry, and yet our services for this construction sector are not that much. I think I'm surprised to see that.
A few factors. I think you may be looking into setting up construction agencies, but this may translate to providing to our local residents instead of non-residents. This is one. The other one is that we may engage many foreign companies in fulfilling the construction projects. Another factor is that our construction may not be as good as how it was during the booming period in the past. So again, the statistics here does point out that relatively to the other sectors, it's not among the top 5. As said to say, this behavior, this breakdown, this pattern is almost the same in the last 10 or so years. If I look into the trends like this, the breakdown like this, between 2006 and 2019, they are pretty much the same. So just to show you, if I use color, I mean, this is a bit small, you can't see. If I use color to show you, different colors will represent a different sector. So this is a legend. If I show you across many years of the Pareto breakdown, you can see the colors, they're not really changed. Not among the top 5, for example. The sectors that have been doing well continue to do well. The sectors that are not doing well continue to not doing well. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we have been focusing on the top critical few for too long, and probably we need some reform on those services sectors that are not perhaps growing as fast. I wouldn't say they are not growing, but they are not growing as fast. So there may be many reasons, right? There may be many reasons, and we will explore those reasons afterwards. So are the sectors growing or contracting? Well, this is the overall. We have seen this in the beginning, and I've used the run charts to look into the runs test, because the runs test allow us to look into the significance of the different non-random pattern. So specifically, I look at the trends and the cluster. If the trends is not significant, I will conclude that the growth is not significant. Right? So this is how I dissect the different data. So to summarize on all the sectors, you can see some sectors, they have significant growth, very clear. The p-value is very much smaller than even 1%. Right? Very, very clear significant growth. Like for example, maintenance and repair services, travel, which is no surprise, insurance, financial services, telecommunication, which is a big one, other business services, and personal, cultural, recreational services. Right? Things like manufacturing services on physical inputs of others, and transport, they are not really significant. Right? There are some upward trend, but they are not significant. Who are the service import providers? This gives you the breakdown. So what I look at is I look at the top trading partners that contribute to 80% of the imports by service sectors. And if I were to advance to the service export trading partners, you can see here, the top few trading partners for import and export, they are very much similar, right? Very much similar. Right? So for example, you can see Singapore is one of the top trading partners we have from Malaysia. China, Thailand, these are again one among the top few according to the service sectors. Yeah. So we export a lot to Singapore, you can see. Some to USA, right, depending on what kind of services we export. Some top export to Japan, yeah. China, for example. You can see the data here stops at 2018 because the breakdown of these trading partners is not yet available in the database in the WTO. Okay. So the top trading partner in export, this gives you a summary of the countries we export services to according to the sectors. You can see Singapore is constantly among almost all of them. We export almost all the services to Singapore. So it's very important for us to maintain good relationship with Singapore. I also look at the trend by country. Do we export continually to the same country? Yes, this is not changed across the different sectors in the last few years. I also look into whether the different sectors would to change across the different countries, at least in the breakdown. Do we export the same kind of services to those countries across the years? They don't change much. And similarly, I look into this kind of thing. So what is the difference here is because I actually flip the country and the services in these two different parameters. Right? So you can then do different kinds of analysis to see whether we ship to the same country in the same pool of service sectors or not. So what is the balance of trade? This is talking about the difference between the export and the import. This is the disappointing performance. Why I say that is because consistently, almost 10 years or more than 10 years, I said in 2011, starting from that point onwards, we have more import than export. So you can see the balance of trade for services is in deficit. Right? So maybe that's one area we can look at to build up the competencies on those things that we import a lot. Can we also build up this competency for services? Right? So across the different sectors, you can see many of them are in deficits. Many of them. 9 service sectors are deficits in balance of trade. Who is in surplus? Well, 2 of them are in surplus. Travel, right, one a top performer. Manufacturing services for input owned by others, they are surplus, but the rest are in deficits, right? So the worst performer you can see is transport, deficit by six thousand million US dollars. So this again gives some idea about where we should improve. So the following would be the restrictiveness. So fortunately, OECD tracks the level of restrictions for different countries across the different service sectors. So there's a database that they have established just in the recent few years. But I would say, fortunately, OECD also looked into Malaysia performance, because Malaysia is not yet a member in OECD countries. Malaysia is not reaching the kind of developed countries that OECD would take. So, but still, they look into the restrictiveness performance of Malaysia. So therefore, I think fortunately we can use that to look into where across the service sectors we should improve. So this STRI, Service Trade Restrictiveness Indices, gives a number to each trade barrier in the modes of supply for service sectors for each country, right? So you can imagine for across the economies, across the different service sectors and subsectors, and each sector or subsector, there are different trade barriers. For each trade barrier, there's one STRI. So we can then see which sector or subsectors of which economy is still high, because if high means it's still restrictive, it's still not promoting free trade, and which of those trade barriers we need to pay attention to, right? So we can then compare up to that level, right? So we can compare by countries, by service sectors or subsectors, by the different trade barriers and how bad it is, because there's a scale of 0 to 1 in the STRI. So when you score a 0 in the STRI in a certain sector in that economy, in that trade barrier, it means you have total openness, no restriction, anything goes. Okay? If you have a 1, that means it's total closure for the market. You cannot do any trading for that sector for providers. Right? So normally you have any value between 0 and 1. Right? So the higher the number, the worse. We want to score closer to 0. Yeah? So OECD compares 46 countries in 22 sectors. So you can see there are subsectors involved over here. As of this year, September 2020, we have data to compare that represents 80% of the total global service trade. So the countries, I'm going to show you the countries. Yeah? Countries, I'm paying particular attention to 8 ASEAN countries, where our neighbors are performing better than Malaysia. And these are the 5 policy areas, the broad areas where the restrictiveness is measuring. Right? Like restrictions on foreign entry, restrictions on movement of people. You heard about the restricted market access. This refers to market access, trade barriers. Other discriminatory measures like the indirect non-discriminatory measure, barriers to competition. For example, the antitrust policy, competition that involves the competition law, for example, regulatory transparencies. So you can have each area to have a score for that subsector, for that economy. So you can see there are many things you can compare over here. So to start with, we look at overall Malaysia across the different sectors. So you can see the different colors over here represent the score in the STRI. So the more area you have, the higher the score, right? So you can see if the area in the bar has a lot, that means you're too restrictive. Right? So what with the top restriction? Legal services. Right? Legal services is a top restrictive subsector, right? Followed by air transport. So you can look into this, and you can look into the subsectors and the respective trade barriers to see where we should focus next, right? But as for MITI, to look into the liberalization efforts. So to prioritize the different subsectors according to the SPR, right? You can see this will be the breakdown, right? Telecommunication service is one of the highest restricted markets. So if I look into the average of the 46 economies, right? So of course we want to know where we are, right? By knowing the ratings of each subsector, we want to know where we fare across the economies. So the 46 economies, OECD has computed the average, maximum, minimum for the different trade barriers across the different years. So the 46 economies are here. I pay particular attention to the ones in blue, right? Because these economies perform better than Malaysia. And not only in the OECD performance, but in WCY. Yeah. So with that information, we can know if Malaysia is worse or the same or better than the average. Then this gives us some idea about where to improve, right? So again, I can't show everything because there are a lot of diagrams. I just show you what this analysis is about. To summarize, all the different trade barriers, you can see Malaysia ranks pretty low, right? So of course you want to rank near number 1, right? But if it's near 46, then it's very bad because that means Malaysia is quite far behind and is very much close to the restrictions and closeness on the market in that sector. And you can see how many countries are ahead of Malaysia, just in Asia alone, right? And whether Malaysia has changed in the restrictiveness in that score in the past few years, 5 years, you can see apart from engineering services, only improved by 0.02, the rest no change. What are the areas no change in the restrictiveness? These are the areas. For example, the restriction of the movement of people, restriction on the foreign entry, right? How we restrict, let's say, for example, the visa, the amount of stay, the freedom of exercising professional practices for foreign suppliers. These are the restrictions. So again, this look into the Malaysian restrictiveness in those areas, and because of the MFN treatment, other member countries like you can treat us the same. You know, if you give me more leeway to do business, I'll give you the same. This is MFN treatment. So by looking into Malaysia's own restrictiveness, it gives some idea about how we are being treated, you know, when we're trying to provide services overseas. So again, if you look across all the different sectors, the first policy sectors that make up 80% of the total policy factors, they are this in yellow, right? Foreign entry restrictions, barriers competition, regulatory transparencies. So again, this gives some idea about where we should improve. Comparing by different modes of supply. So again, I'm looking at those restrictiveness score that's more than half, right? If it's 0 to 1, more than 50%, you can see all these are not good. So because you know across the board, Malaysia is pretty much restricted across ASEAN countries. It makes no surprise why we have so many restrictions across the board. So if I compare by sectors like this in countries, we can see Malaysia where it is. So there's a legend here somewhere. It's not shown. One is maximum, one is minimum, one is average. So you can see sometimes Malaysia is quite high compared to other countries. So we don't want to be here, but we want to be here. So you can see across who are better in certain sectors when compared to others. These are the details of how we interpret the different trade barriers. So again, we are not going to those details to give some idea about how these trade barriers are being defined and how the scores are being given. Yeah. So actually, it's quite comprehensive. Right? So the score is not simply given by just 5 trade barriers. There are many sub-definitions of those trade barriers that the assessors following to see whether the index need to be scored higher.
Lawrence, we are running out of time. Maybe you can focus on the recommendations.
Sure, no problem. Let me go to recommendations. So to summarize, these are the factors that cause the service exports to not do well. Yeah, so you can see it spans across the fundamentals. Why service providers are not doing well? Well, one big chunk is the infrastructure, human capital, the network infrastructure, telephony infrastructure, institutions, whether quality of institution is there, the reliability of the institution is there. This is unlike transactional goods, where you can inspect the goods before you buy. Yeah? For anyone to buy a service, they cannot say, well, you go to the doctor and say, show me your graduation certificate and your list of experience before I agree to become the patient. So institution quality plays a big part. So the fundamentals and the policy proactiveness, for example, how much do we give aid to the service exporters? Do they receive loans and lease easily? Yeah, are these available? Are the subsidy easy to get for the service providers? These are all the proactiveness that we give to make the service exports happen. There are other measurements that I'm not going to go into, right? But you can see some we have too much, some we don't have enough. Right? So this cause the restrictiveness and the performance to drop. So let me go to this summary just to give you 1 second to look into what we talked about. These are all the different key drivers that will affect the service exports performance. Now, let me go into the recommendations. My top 5 recommendations, they are ordered in that way. MITI, they will have to continually structural reforms in the service liberalization initiative. We actually had this services reform in a strategy called Strategic Reform Initiatives, SRI, in 2011 as part of the Economic Transformation Program. That was handled by multiple organizations, like you see over here, the MSDC, NAPSAC, MSPC, even the trade under MITI. But this was initiated a number of years back, right? So I think the next transformation program, we need to reinitiate this strategic reform to look into more liberalization across the board, yeah, for Malaysia services. We need to identify new commitment in 3 broad services sectors. Why these 3? Because these 3 services sectors, we don't have currently commitment in the GATS for Malaysia, right? So if you go into the commitment schedule, Malaysia has 0 commitment in these 3 areas. Right? So I think it's time for us to identify these few areas, as well as those other subsectors that we don't currently have commitments. Moving on, there are 2 areas that I think MITI will have to reduce restrictiveness. One is the horizontal policy measures. One is the sectoral areas. Let's talk about sectoral areas because that's easy to understand. Right? So we talk about different sectors. So there are different sectors where some are performing well, some are not in certain areas. We can identify those to prioritize. This is called sectoral levels. The horizontal policy measures refers to the policy that affects across the board, across the different modes of supply, different service sectors, and the different trade barriers. Right. So of course, if you look into the impact of the improvement, this will be a large one, right? Because this measures the horizontal policies. Right. So just to give some idea about those horizontal approach, so these are some of the examples. Yeah, so again, there are too many of them. Yeah. Just to give you some idea, one line of the commitment in the GATS for Malaysia represents one restrictiveness in policy. Do you know how many lines there are in the GATS commitment of Malaysia? Not 100, not 200, not 1,000, not 2,000, but over 5,000, right, in the GATS commitment. So there's just simply too many, right, just to go through. Sorry, let me scroll to the next recommendation. The other one is matric, because there's a large variation in service provision. So we have to heighten the awareness for the service providers to lean their service. I think maybe Kabir know what I'm talking about. To probably set deadline or recognition to award to service providers who have attained a certain services standards. Like for example, they have already transformed according to Industrial 4.0, for example. We should have similar things for services. Lean transformation, for example. This will promote the brand awareness for the service providers in Malaysia, and therefore for them to expand overseas. Right? So the rest of the combinations are more to mid to longer term recommendations. Say, for example, like giving technology entrepreneur incentives. Right? So for those service providers who can think about alternative service exports, like bundling with goods, otherwise not a traditional export that they can think of, they should be awarded, rewarded. We have such kind of incentives for technology and entrepreneurs. They should be expanded to service providers.
Yes, coming to the policy itself, I mean, I was looking into it. You are putting MPC as the one responsible for the services sector and so on. I mean, to my understanding, previous years of working with MPCs and the rest, MPC were probably looking very much on the manufacturing and the manufacturing services sector rather than overall services. So I was wondering, because I mean, who actually in Malaysia, I mean, like you can see in travel, definitely fall under tourism, Ministry of Tourism responsible for it. I mean, you can see a very clear-cut jump into it. But the rest of the other services sector is quite very hard to see that. I mean, who are actually responsible for this particular sector? So to boost them up, it's not going to be very easy.
We have a list of the regulators for the different sectors. So maybe we can start with that list. Perhaps there may be addition or changes. We can then decide. But you can see we do have those lists of regulators for different sectors. Yeah, this is what I showed just now. So we probably can start with that list to see, where we can get people to be responsible to help those sectors. But the incentive that we talked about, trying to put it into PowerPoint. Okay. Some of this incentive given by, let's say, for example, MOSTI and MPRC or MEDEC. This will be a generic body, to look into not just products, or not just on entrepreneurs, but they can also include services providers as part of the recipient for those awards. So I think, Kabir, when I talk about the specific incentive, I think apart from the custodians and associations, I think we can target those generic bodies who give this incentive. That's what my recommendation is.
Okay, thank you.
Two more slides. These are probably mid to longer term recommendations. The comprehensive and progressive trans-Pacific partnership still not ratified, because this will have impact to the service export performance and leeway for countries. Service export fund, we have this, but it's going to end by end of this year. So I recommend this to be extended going forward, and also expanded, because right now, previously excluded service recipient like tourism and financial services, they should be included as well. I mean, we have so many service sectors. The blueprint, services sector blueprint, again, this is going to end this year. It was launched 5 years ago. So I hope this can be included in the consideration in the review for the next blueprint. E-Trade. Moderator had this program for exporters to use. It's an online tool. Again, it's already ended. But I think from feedback, many users welcome this use of online tools. So I think recommendation is to revive the continue what do you call the provision of services for exporters. Next one is the tax incentive. Again, for if there's no incentive, it's pretty hard to boost people to try to expand their business. So again, businesses need to have, for example, cash flow. Right? So tax incentive is a way for them to make sure they've got enough funds to do business. Moderator continue to improve cooperation among SMEs. And lastly, I think MPC, this is my last slide. I think this is a longer term recommendation. MPC is already looking into improving criteria. Encik Kabir, yourself, you are looking into some of the criteria and how we can improve the competitiveness. What I have found out is that all those criteria that involves infrastructure, human capital, education, people development, equality, rule of law, all these are prerequisites, right, to allow service sector to grow, to export. And in some cases, I did a correlation to look into those other indicators and the services exports. They are very strong correlation to all the other areas, specifically the infrastructure factor. Right? So if you look into the telecommunication factor, we did, I would say we did fairly poor in that criteria. But I know industries are really looking into this because paying attention to this improvement. This has major impact on services export. Same for human capital, education. Again, we need to increase competency of people because it's all about people that can provide services. Right? If we don't have high quality, reliable, competent people, we can't provide services. I think that with that, I end my sharing. I think I've taken a bit more time. Thank you for your patience. So it's back to you, Encik Kabir. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, it's a very technical and a lot of things to be shown. So I know it's the time taken is a little bit longer, but I think I have to do a justice on the looking at the slides, because otherwise the work that you have done is not going to be shared. But I think you do your justice by looking into it. All right. Just one question here that we have is that if you look at the commercial export of commercial services, the #1 ranked country basically is United States. Among the top 10 there, United Kingdom. You have Germany, France, and then Ireland, China, India. Surprisingly, I mean, majority of this country are actually Western country. My first question is, why this happened? I mean, we talk about services, and why are this country most of the time actually come from Western country that are the top 10? Another thing is that looking into Asia, there's two countries that was, I mean, three countries that was on the top 10 is actually India, China, and Singapore. Just a curiosity, I mean, out of very much curiosity, is that if we look at Singapore itself, what are those #1 sector? I mean, that actually becoming a #1 sector that contribute to them, because Singapore have about 160, I think it's 163 billions. I think Singapore is 182 billion. as compared to Malaysia, 40 billions of service export. So you see a very big gap. I mean, why? Yeah, I mean, like Singapore can. In which sector actually? I'm sure Singapore are not going to be on travel. I'm not sure. It's not going to be a primary sector for Singapore. But what are those other sectors that they managed to contribute? Like from Malaysia, I'm surprised to see that financial sector, and these are the sectors that we are trying to boost up. We create Labuan last time to boost up, but we are not there. Nothing's in the sector that we're going to be, actually contribute to the service sector export. So, can you comment on that? I mean, seriously, I look at a Western country, they are the one, and I look at Malaysia, also Singapore, India. India is another surprising area. I mean, the country that export a lot of services.
When you talk about India, Singapore, Western countries, do you mean we buy from them or we export to them?
This is the figures that I got it from the export services figures. I mean, like Malaysia is 40 billion, isn't it? You gave me us a 40 billion.
Malaysia figure, we export to them. So you're talking about the countries that we export to, our export trading partners.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the question.
Not so much a trading partner. These are the volumes of the export commercial services that by Malaysia is 40 billion, but as compared to Singapore 182 billion.
I think that gives an indication. If you just compare the population of Singapore and Malaysia on a broad scale, certainly we outdo them with more individuals who can able to provide services, right? But Singapore already positioned themselves since the start that they are not going to have natural resources. Let's say, for example, transportation services. We probably have more coverage in this area that we can export. So I think it depends on different sectors. Singapore has positioned itself to become services hub, not only in this region but to the entire Asia. They realized this very early. This can be seen in their what they call articles and reports. Similarly, in the international trade report for Singapore, they have already recognized services contribution to their economy decades ago. Right? So if you look into the articles, they already pump in focus to boost service sector when they see a switch. When services contribution has taken over the traditional goods exports. So for Singapore, they probably started very early when it comes to putting resources and making sure that their competencies are there. And they realize without this, they cannot survive. It's a small country, they focus a lot of, if you look into their infrastructure, the educational achievement, the human capital achievement, the quality, all these indicators, it gives you some idea about why they are doing well. The rule of law, corruption index, these are precursors to services export. So I think if you my opinion, I'll say, well, because they got their fundamentals rights. And they got their fundamentals rights to make sure they put all those precursors in place to make sure across the board in the horizontal measures, they are not putting too much restrictiveness to the foreign providers. They know they have to promote free trade for people to come in, because if they don't allow the trade to come in or to go out, they can't survive. So I think just to put it in a general sense, Singaporeans, this is probably their mode of survival. Whereas we do depend on other things, apart from services. We do have other industries, logistics, oil and gas business. We have many other reliance that not only contributing to our economy. So I think my view is that we probably have to emulate how countries like Singapore or even India in certain sectors like computer information services, computer repair services, IT services, ICT services, we probably can benchmark, why they've already lifted their restrictions and why we still have restrictions in those areas. Just to give you one page, just one page to show what I mean. There are over 5,000 lines. I'm giving you one page just to show you. You can see when I look at say just 3 countries, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, because these 2 countries they have free trade and they perform much better in terms of the criteria. If I compare one of the trade barriers, conditions on market entry, for example, conditions on operations, and those sub areas, according to legal services in this subsector, just one of these sub area, subsector, sub conditions, you can see, let's say for example, conditions of service provider. Hong Kong, Singapore, they already have listed no condition, no protectionism. Malaysia still hang in there. I look at this few. There are so many of these. Our neighboring countries are already taking away the restrictions, but we still hang on to those. I know for certain sectors we need to protect, but this is one area.
This STRI, I mean the Service Trade Restriction Index, many people are saying that the problem with the STRI index, if you look at it closely, is more protection for all the foreign companies rather than for internal companies. So that's probably one of the reasons that STRI are not really gaining popularity in Malaysia in terms of.
I think we need to change that thought, Kabir. You know why? Because if we restrict, for example, we restrict foreign investors, for example, if we restrict foreign investors to come in, then the FDI will be poor. Then we may have lesser opportunity for foreign companies to set up, for us to have opportunity to serve non-residents. Because the service export can happen for us to serve non-residents, for other people to have their presence over here. When they employ people from local, we can still have service export. When they buy physical inputs from Malaysia, when we sell service goods. So we need to change this mindset. We protect ourselves, yes, but at the same time, we are harming the service export. Because if we stop people from coming in, we are stopping the goods.
One question for you related to that also. I mean, why the emphasis on the restrictions of local policy, that might affect us commercial service export, when objectively we need to improve it. So by having a policy in Malaysia, internal one that is restricted, do you think that is also one of the factors that hinder this kind of raising the ranking of our export of commercial services?
Yes, I agree with that, and this is definitely one of them. And I can lump this to the general argument of protectionism. I think we still have to protect the interests of our residents. Yeah, we still have to protect the interests of our shared prosperity and growth. Sometimes we do have to make sure when we have, let's say, for example, foreign establishment, the ownership cannot go beyond a certain percentage. Let's say, for example, professional services, we still have to protect our local residents because they are still our residents. Yeah? So I think this will not go away easily and fast. It still needs time to progressively, release the kind of protectionism, because we still rely on our local, providers so they can have a job. Otherwise, this will go into market failure again, and then this will spread into other problems if we leave that protectionism too fast. So it's a double-edged sword, like Kabir. I can't just say, yeah, let's go for free trade, because it doesn't work that way. Otherwise, by improving this, we're going to harm other areas. So I think the recommendation here is to see what areas other countries have already lifted, and if they pose, a risk to us to do the same. If it is, what will be the plan for us to put in place to minimize that risk, but still to have a schedule to liberalize those, so we can be on par with the neighboring countries. So I think at the same time, infrastructure, competencies, human rights, things that like government efficiencies, productivity, all these count. So to do this in the long run, it's not easy. So I think MPC has a huge task in trying to have a concerted effort from different experts to go into this area like yourself.
Okay.
Hopefully this
Thank you.
answers your comment.
Thank you, Lawrence. Yes, I have many more questions. In fact, I would like to ask, but because of the time constraint, we have to call off our session. Maybe we can have a further more engagement later outside there, because
Sure.
I think this is this is a very interesting what I would say subject matter, and very heavy actually. It's area to be focused on, because it's service sector is one of those area that I think I would say is one of the area that are going to be focused by the Malaysian government. But when we talk about export services or the export of commercial services, this is another area that I think we need to embark on a journey of looking into how can we do business of services as a services business, not just about within the boundary of Malaysia alone, but we also probably start looking into providing Maybank after doing it in other country, and maybe we should be spreading our organization everywhere so that we can reach up the numbers. So I can see the reason why these are the main area that WCY was looking into it, because that will affect the economic situation in Malaysia. That's why this is a main contributor into the economic GDPs and so on. So Lawrence, once again, I mean, your in-depth study is a lot. Actually, you spend probably tons of hours to study those things. And unfortunately, the time is not enough for you to actually explore everything in detail. But we have no choice. As again, maybe we create another platform later on. But yes, on behalf of Malaysia Productivity Corporation, which is the organizer, I would like to say thank you to you, and of course to all the attendees for listening to us now. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for your presence. And I hope we can see you again later in the afternoon at 2 p.m. today. We have another topic, interesting topics on food costs. So I think that will be probably be an area for everybody interest, and to see how can we bring down the food costs in Malaysia. Then we'll see on this particular area later on in the afternoon. So with that, once again, thank you to all, and stay home, stay safe, and take care of yourself. And I will finish it in wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. See you guys later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.